Big developments this morning in the negotiations over President Biden's sweeping social spending package. This package could lead to major changes for seniors, new parents, kids, students. A source tells CNN that Senator Joe Manchin has informed Democratic leaders that he will accept a spending bill of up to $1.7 trillion. And Democratic leaders want to get votes on this started by midweek. This news comes after Biden hosted Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer at his home in Delaware yesterday. That's the first time he's done anything like that with members of Congress. Joining us now, CNN political commentators Jess McIntosh and Errol Lewis. Errol, I was just looking at Politico. They call this the 9 biggest days of Biden's presidency at this point.
Not an exaggeration in this case. This is the whole agenda. This is the whole ball of wax. Among other things, it will enable him perhaps to go to the G20 and to the climate summit with a win in hand. But the bigger picture is whether or not the Democrats have made good on their promises. This is going to be the question in the midterm election. This is going to be the question in the reelect for Joe Biden. This is the whole thing. There are some legislators, John, who have spent their entire lives waiting for this moment. And to a certain extent, Joe Biden is one of those people. There's a lot resting on this. If they get this done, imagine dental and vision for seniors forever, or at least for a few years, and then it becomes forever. Imagine, help for kids going to community college, or at the other end of the scale, pre-kindergarten learning for people, the child tax credit. This is big, big, big stuff. It's our own version of the New Deal. And so, yeah, we could know in 9 days whether or not we get a New Deal or more partisan fighting.
It is a huge social safety net, right? Even initially it was $6 trillion, now it's less, but it's still gigantic. There's still pieces that need to be in place here, though, Jess. And I wonder, Joe Manchin's a key one. What about Kyrsten Sinema? What about progressives like AOC?
Yeah, I think at this point, I want to see how much leverage does the Progressive Caucus still maintain. They were significantly stronger than we have ever seen them before in the negotiations that led us to this place. I think we're looking at, do we address as many crises as we can for a shorter period of time, or do we whole cloth jettison jobs or education or childcare or care economy programs that we need? I think this is a wildly popular agenda. The pieces that we are talking about are wildly popular, even in a bipartisan manner across the country. Nobody should be afraid to run on this agenda. So I'm hopeful. I'm going to look for the attitude, that kind of attitude, and hope that we do more in a moment when we need to be doing more.
Well, how much of this is about the framing, though? It's interesting. You talk about what you're worried will not be in it. And Errol, I've been reading quotes from members of Congress who say, we've got to start talking about what people will be getting that they haven't been. Where there's zero now, there will be $1.7 trillion worth.
Well, that's right. We've reported it for months now as 3.5 trillion. Will it get done? And to a certain extent, there are people waking up this morning and will probably be disappointed to hear that it's only 1.7 trillion. We've gotten, I think, a little spoiled in this pandemic era about $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. The reality is that if you're moving toward cutting child poverty in half, that is a monumental achievement that people have dreamt of for generations. And to go further down that road, whether it's child care or other kind of enhancements, that's a big, big deal. Even if it's means tested, okay, fine. Let's keep moving forward. Big things can happen, and that underlying proposition, if it's not framed properly, could turn a victory into a defeat in the eyes of voters, and that in itself would be tragic.
I want to agree really strongly with everything that you just said and put into perspective that this is ultimately going to be an outcome story, not a process story. So these days are literally the worst days of having to pass historic legislation. 5, 10 years from now, We're talking about future generations and families that have been helped. We are not talking about Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema.
Well, let's talk about the coming weeks because there are a couple of key races, including Virginia, where Terry McAuliffe has basically said, guys, pass this, throw me a line. Is it going to be enough?
Good, I'll tell you that, because just as you say, I mean, the bill itself will be somewhat popular, and then it becomes really popular after those checks start to flow, after people see the relief, after people understand what it means for their lives. But we've got Americans who are in a very rambunctious mood right now. You've got millions of people walking off the job with nothing on the other side of it. People are really, really fed up. And I think, a headline in the news isn't necessarily going to turn that around in the short term.
Democratic Senators Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin showed up at President Biden's home in Delaware Sunday as the party tries to work out details on a social spending bill. The president has been pushing Democratic lawmakers to agree on a framework for his agenda. The original $3.5 trillion bill was trimmed to $2 trillion to appease Senators Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Zeke Miller joins us now. He's a CBS News political contributor and Associated Press White House reporter. Zeke, great to see you. Do you have any details on the meat of these talks between Senators Schumer and Manchin and President?
And we know that this reflects the heightened sense of urgency at the White House and on Capitol Hill to try to get this package done. Essentially, the way some White House folks have talked about it is they're trying to land the plane before the president takes off on his trip to Europe later this week. We don't know the exact details of what was discussed now between Senators Manchin and Schumer and the president this morning over breakfast in Wilmington at the president's home. But it's an indication, they're coming in on Sunday. Things are getting closer. That said, we're still told that they're not at the point yet where they believe the deal is imminent. They're closer, but it's not done yet.
Now, which measures are out of this?
So, as you mentioned, this bill has already been essentially cut in half over since it was first put forward by the president back in April. Things that are out for sure, we believe, are free community college. That even the president acknowledged that that's now dropped out of the bill just because of the cost. Issues pushed by progressives, such as expanding Medicare to pay for things like dental care, hearing aids, vision care. That has been trimmed substantially and potentially is out entirely. There's still some talk of maybe some sort of voucher system for that component, but that is looking like it's going to be out, as well as a big chunk of the climate package pushed by the president, which also comes just on the eve of the president going to that major international climate summit in Scotland in a week and a half. That is a bit of a disappointment to the president. That was at the behest and the insistence of Joe Manchin. The president insists, though, there still be some sort of major climate package component here, but it's really a big chunk of it will, as that bill shrunk, a lot of that came out of the climate package.
Now, once they decide what actually goes in the bill, how do Democrats plan to pay for it?
There's still some uncertainty around that as well, and that's been the hallmark of this entire process. Where there seems to be an agreement on the outlines, the broad contours of how to pay for something, and then there's a wrench in the system. Here, there does seem to be consensus around using things like a corporate minimum tax, as well as raising some rates on wealthy individuals. But the precise mix of how they go about doing it, it remains to be seen because the president's because there's still some not a whole lot of agreement among Democrats on how to do all of that, particularly from it's not just Joe Manchin involved, it's Senator Kirsten Sinema, who has some objections to some of those tax issues. So the White House insists they'll get sort of the total net cost and the deficit to be zero. It'll be deficit neutral, but just how they get there, that's just it'll sort of depend on exactly what programs make it in, because then they know how much they have to offset with those new taxes.
That being said, is Build Back Better falling short of the promises the president?
It's certainly trimmed back from where it was. What we started to hear from the White House officials in the last couple of days, we heard from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just this morning as well. Yes, it's smaller than it was, but it's bigger than anything else that has come before it. And there's an element of truth to that that the White House can hang its hat on. But the question is, well, particularly from a political standpoint, will that be enough for the president to sell this package to the American people, and particularly the progressives in his party who are sort of looking to this moment as their one shot, really, with unified control of Washington, facing some headwinds in the midterms. Who knows when this moment will come back around for Democrats again. They wanted to go really big. You heard from Bernie Sanders, some others, they were looking at $6 trillion and above. So for this package to likely end up in the $2 trillion or below, they feel there's a lot of unfinished business for Democrats to do, for the president to do. The White House will have to find a way to sell that as a victory, but they're facing some skeptics in their own flank.
Now, President Biden wants the reconciliation package passed before he heads to Glasgow for the UN Climate Summit at the end of this month. Is that a realistic goal?
It is certainly possible. It is very, very difficult. And every hour we get closer to the president leaving Washington on Thursday makes that much more unlikely because they have to write this legislation. So once there's an agreement on what's there, yes, there are some draft notions of what different packages look like, but on Capitol Hill in these negotiations, what lawmakers in the White House are doing are rewriting the lengths of these programs, how long they'll last. They have to rewrite the legislation, and they have to print it up. We're probably beyond the point where there will be a sort of a formal scoring of that bill by the Congressional Budget Office. So there'll be some uncertainty about what they're voting on. It's far more likely that we'll get just an agreement and then potentially a vote on the infrastructure package that has sort of been held up by these reconciliation negotiations, with a reconciliation vote happening shortly thereafter. But again, that will also depend on the internal Democratic politics, because some of those progressives don't just want an agreement, they want to vote before they give the green light to that.
According to a recent Gallup poll, President Biden's public support has fallen 14 percentage points since June. 42% of U.S. adults approve of the job he's doing. How concerned is the White House about this decline?
Publicly, not at all. Privately, behind closed doors, pretty concerned and growing more so. I mean, it's a challenge the president faces, particularly when it comes to keeping control of this party. His political capital is diminishing. He needs it at his maximum if he's going to get these legislative packages through. That said, the argument, sort of the sunny side argument you hear from some Biden aides, is that this is a factor of COVID sort of resurging over the last couple of months. Now it seems to be receding a little bit. And also that this legislative package, there's been a lot of noise about negotiations, and if they can get a deal on this package, those two headwinds will diminish. The president's poll numbers, they think, will then come back up. That is their gamble. That is their bet. There's no certainty to that. And will also mean the president will have to be able to effectively sell this package and also the COVID recovery. And he struggled with that over the last several months.